The issue of the fuel subsidy you've mentioned was a high point at the deliberation. Can this report be implemented?
You know, of course, I mean, with due respect, even the recommendation that was adopted, which is that government should go and build refineries, government should repair refineries, people should go and build refineries and all that stuff. Government has been building refineries or repairing them for the last 30 years and they have failed. So telling the failed person to go and fail again, I mean, it isn't the solution. It is almost like trying to kick the can down the road that, okay, let's not address it now, let's do it in 3 years' time. The truth is that you don't need a national conference to decide what you want to do away with a fuel subsidy. That's the bottom line. The last time the government tried to adjust the price of petrol, there was no conference. Executive has powers to alter some things. So if tomorrow they make you president, you can change some things once you're elected. So that I'm not too worried about those kinds of decisions that a president and his cabinet can do on their own, with or without National Assembly, with or without a national conference, with or without. And the important thing is that they have designed a policy that, like I'm recommending, that makes it possible that you're taking money away from the rich to give to the poor. If you do that, the poor will not complain because they'll be getting more, than they receive right now. So the poor will actually hail you. The problem actually, I think, is those in the middle. Those in the middle don't want to give up their share of the subsidy, but they are clever enough to use the poor as the excuse. The point I'm making is that there are some things that an executive cannot do on their own. There are some things that have to be done by a National Assembly. Fuel subsidy, as you saw in the last case, the National Assembly were against an attempt to adjust or remove it. The fact is that the executive has powers to adjust such things, so that the National Conference isn't only about things that involve the Assembly, the House of Rep or Senate. It involves everything. So some of our recommendations can be implemented by the executive on their own. A few others involve laws to be changed. So it's the ones that involve laws to be changed that you've got to create maximum buy-in. But with due respect, the fuel subsidy does not entail necessarily creating new laws or enacting new laws, because there's no law that says the price of petrol must be 100 naira. People who are well educated, some even say they're economists, keep on saying this thing like, oh, if we had enough refineries, there'll be no problem. Look, even if you had 1,000 refineries, if you give them crude oil, at a price below the world market price for crude oil, and you tell them to refine it here and sell it to Nigerians at 97 naira. As soon as they finish doing that, the Nigerians who they sell it to know that if you take it across the border, you can sell it for 150 or more. Now, even the so-called domestic refiner, whom you gave that crude to at a price below world market, he also has the temptation that he has two choices: sell it in Nigeria for 97 naira, or find some way to ship it out and sell it elsewhere for 150. So it's about arbitrage opportunity. If you create an opportunity for arbitrage, there are 160 million Nigerians, millions of which are clever enough to exploit it. And it's no use saying things like, oh, it's for the government to make sure that there's no arbitrage. The lesson of history worldwide is that very few governments are able to achieve that. Not more so in a country that has 4,000 miles of borders with no fence, no demarcation, nothing. Not to add our coastline. So the point I'm making is that whether you refine locally or not, there's still the issue of saying that a more efficient way of handling this problem is to use the world market price, sell crude oil to any refiner at the world market price, let him refine efficiently and sell at the world market price, import parity. Then you give physical cash to the very poor, which they can use to subsidize their own purchase if they wish to buy the refined products. And then the rich man pays the world market price, which is the similar principle that is being used now on fertilizers, whereby they're giving the farmer a subsidy directly. So my point is that subsidies are best when you can identify the poor people, give them an actual cash handout to Mr. X, this is your amount, Mr. Y, that's your amount. Years ago, you could not do that because we didn't have the advancements in biometrics, So you were in danger of paying the same poor man 17 times. Today, it's very easy. Everybody, rich, poor, or whatever, you only have one pair of eyes. If they use biometrics to identify that this is Mr. X, once they fade you once, that's the end. You cannot use the same pair of eyes. The only risk you run is that poor people from across the border, from Niger, from Chad, they decide to travel across the border and claim they are Nigerians to get their own monthly share. But the amount of money you lose from that is a pittance compared to losing billions on subsidy for kerosene, where billionaires and tycoons are basically trying to game the entire system.
The conference also voted that the issue of the minimum wage should be retained in the exclusive legislative list. Why do you think the arguments of those pushing that it should be moved, that the minimum wage should be moved to the concurrent list, why do you think the arguments were rejected?
I'm not too worried about whether it is retained on list A or list B, for as long as you do not make the mistake of trying to set a very high minimum wage. So I think those who were saying they wanted a national minimum wage set centrally, if I'm to make economic sense of what they're saying, I think they are also hinting that they should set that minimum wage at a level which is low enough so that even the poorest states in Nigeria can afford to pay it. Because if you can't set a minimum wage at a level that is too high for the poor states, there will be a problem. So if you say it must be set centrally and nationally, then you also have to make sure that the poorer or the poorest states can also afford to pay that minimum wage. What you cannot do is to say you set the minimum wage centrally at the federal level. You then put it at a high level that is beyond the poorer states who can't afford it. Then you create a crisis. Now, the alternative, I think, why some were saying, let us, if we're talking devolution and trying to decentralize, then let us take things like minimum wage and equally have them decentralized. Let every state, based on what pertains, how rich or poor they are, so which means that the richer states may have a higher minimum wage, the poorer ones will have a lower minimum wage. But I think at the end of the day, the bulk of the delegates wanted a single national minimum wage. But then it has to be set responsibly. And that was why there was a second amendment that was defeated. Somebody proposed an amendment to, having agreed that it be set nationally, somebody proposed an amendment that the national minimum wage be increased from 18,000 to 40,000, like now. And it was voted down by the delegates. It was voted down not because we don't care for the low-income earners, but because we know that even the current 18,000 is a problem for the poorer parts of the country in terms of the employers being able to afford it. So if you just jack it up and say let's make it 40,000, 100,000, 1 million, you create a bigger problem. So which means that the decision that was taken was that let us have a single national minimum wage, but then it has to be at a level that the poorer parts of Nigeria too can afford to adopt that minimum wage.
Now, let's move into the modus operandi of the National Assembly. People have called that the National Assembly should be run on a part-time basis. Now, do you see the National Assembly passing this adoption?
You know, in politics sometimes, the aim, if you're going to limit yourself to what you think a National Assembly may pass today, then you may come up with very few ideas. I think you have to first be idealistic. You have to think about what is best for the country also. A national conference, I've said repeatedly, is also a contest of ideas. If you bring out some good ideas and the bulk of the nation wants them, eventually, even if it's not today, it might be tomorrow. If you want a tree to grow, you must sow the seed today. So even if all you're doing is sowing a seed and more Nigerians begin to accept that, we can no longer afford to pay every senator, hundreds of millions of naira and everybody in the House of Rep. We want to bring down the cost of governance. If you sell that idea and many Nigerians buy into it, then you create the enabling environment that eventually forces those in charge to accept the reality that, look, Nigerians are fed up with you paying yourselves a fortune. We want you to receive, almost be on a part-time basis. Because there are people in the legislature anyway, with due respects, they operate as if it's part-time. That is, some of them only show up which is their right, Tuesday and Thursday, 3 days. They're running the business, they're doing other things. Some almost have a second job anyway. So what people were saying is that to bring down the cost of governance, let us adopt an arrangement which some countries have of making this business part-time, in which case you also pay them accordingly part-time. So I think it's just, it reflects the national mood. And when the matter was put to the vote, I think there was a huge yes vote in favor of making it part-time.
Now, Mr. Peterson, before I let you go, the issue of the timetable was one thing that we've seen so far that members did not strictly adhere to it. As a matter of fact, the 1 day given for consideration was extended. And do you think this might affect the set dates for the conference to end?
I think, let's be careful. We are not, because there's some confusion as to how many extensions there have been of the conference timetable. There was an original timetable that was for 3 months. And then there was an extension of 4 weeks that was granted when it became, I think, obvious that it would be impossible to finish the assignment in less than 90 days. And so we have moved to try and finish it in 120 days. That timetable and the work plan based on these 120 days, we are only very marginally behind it. And there are some days in that work plan that you can use to try and make up lost ground. So if nothing goes wrong, and if things go according to plan, it is possible to catch up with the 1 or 2 days that were lost and eventually finish our work within this revised work plan, which is based on a 4-week extension that was granted. So therefore, I mean, all is not lost. I'm optimistic that we'll finish the work.
Now, just to have an overview of the national conference, a lot of expectations greeted this national conference. Is it likely to make a difference? Let's start from you. Did it meet your expectation?
It is meeting my expectations, but that's partly because by my nature, I always try and make sure that I have realistic expectations. I've already spoken earlier that even from the composition of the national conference in terms of delegates, the background where they came from, I expected this conference to be very strong on political issues, like we just discussed, part-time legislature, things which everybody understands. People have seen what it costs, and they want to bring a change that will reduce the cost of governance. We're good at such things. We're also not bad on the social side. On the legal side, there are quite a large number of well-rounded, experienced lawyers there, so there are no mistakes being made there. It's on the economic side where I worry a little, but I knew that in advance anyway. And like I explained earlier, there are reasons why the economic side is always more difficult, because it involves making choices. And people naturally want to duck away from making choices and say, I want everything. If you approach economic arguments that way, you want everything, then somebody will tell you later that, you know, your report is unrealistic because you said you want to retain fuel subsidy for the poor, for the medium income, for the wealthiest Nigerians. You said you then want also a monthly handout for the unemployed. You then also said you want a situation where the government should build refineries with the money that they don't have. You then also came back to demand again that the same government should police all the borders. So you're just adding on more and more things with no attempt to figure out how are you going to pay for all these things. So on the economic side, naturally, is the place where people are allowed globally to just dream, to ask for everything. Then you leave somebody else with the task of making those choices for you. Because whoever becomes president tomorrow, whichever party is in governance, they will realize that they can't afford all those things. So they will have to make choices. So the economy managing an economy is about having the discipline to make choices and making the right choices. And that's why my choices involve excluding the rich from receiving a fuel subsidy and using that saving to pay out to the poor.
Now, what will happen at the conference this week? A lot, actually. More reports will be considered and adopted, more decisions taken, and all these and more we promise to bring you on this program, with added perspective, of course, from our regular guest. Till we meet again next week, I'm Lanre Lasese. Bye.